Everybody, so I want to talk about your exam, and this will serve as your exam review for this course. This exam review is very detailed. If you follow what I say to the letter and you open the Google Docs and you really spend time working through the Google Docs and preparing for what they ask you to prepare for, you'll do really well in this exam. And that's an important step for having success in this course. So I really urge you to put a lot of effort into this exam review. Put a couple hours in and really prepare for the exam. So where you find this exam review is you go to content, click on content, and the exam review is down here. Open it up, and we can take a look at kind of what's involved in the lesson. The lesson is simply going over what exactly is going to be on the exam and what we expect. So you know that the exam is on Thursday, and you're going to be writing the exam at 8:30 in the morning. You can, if you start at 8:30, but you don't finish in the hour and a half or 2 hours that you're given, I'm going to be here all day, so it's fine. There's really no real time limit for the exam. Just want to make sure that you have enough time to successfully hand everything in and get it done. You're going to be writing the exam in the location that you normally go to, the closest to your home. For the most of us, that is the Kingston location. You can use paper or a computer to write the exam. I will have exams photocopied and traditional kind of pen and paper, but you can also do it on the computer if you'd like, with help with spelling and Grammarly, that kind of thing. Those things will be at your disposal. The only caveat is if you're using the computer, you may only have one window open at any given time. In other words, you wouldn't be able to have 2 or 3 windows open. There's no research being done here. This is simply exactly what you know and what you've prepared for. So we're going to ask you only have one window open at any given time. And, that's just kind of the way it's going to be. It's worth 20% of our final mark. So the format of the exam is it's in 2 sections. One section is on poetry. The other is you'll be writing a comparative essay using both of the major works that we've done throughout the course of the year. So for poetry, obviously, you just have to know our poetic devices. You can review all the poems that we've done, take a look at how those poetic devices occur in poetry. Also, there'll be a question asking you to link the poem that's in the Sight Passage poem that's on the exam to your world in some way. So you're going to talk about, however the theme or whatever's happening in the poem is applicable to you today in our world. Obviously, when you do this, you have to make direct reference back to the poem by using quotes and examples from the poem to back up what you've said about how it relates to our world. You'll be writing a comparative essay. And you're going to be using both of Mice and Men and Death of a Salesman, the 2 major works that we've done to prove your thesis. So in almost all questions, in everything you do, you're going to have to write a proper P paragraph, point, example, explanation. That's kind of what we've been harping on throughout the entirety of this course, is that you have a point, you use an example to back it up, and then you'll be able to explain what that example shows. Some tips here I've given you, as well as a link to an essay explaining how to properly prepare for an exam. Open up here. This is your Google exam review Google document. If you click here, it's going to take you to this page, and just a really quick overview of exactly what we're going to be doing in your exam. So you're going to see the first section is on poetry. So you're going to be provided with a sight poem, which is a poem you've never seen before, and you're going to be asked 4 very specific questions about these 6 devices. The question is going to cover all our poetic devices. Here they are for you. Please review them, what they mean, how they occur in poetry. Remember, it's very important to always explain not only that the device is present in the poem, but how or why the author is choosing to use that particular device. I think specifically with symbol and imagery, sometimes we run into a problem with that. It's very important that we name what the symbol is. Like the author uses a book. The book is a symbol of knowledge, and here's why they choose to use it. That kind of format, same as imagery. Imagery makes me feel this. I taste this or smell this, or hear this, or see this particular image, and this is what it makes me feel, and here's why the author would choose to use that. Very important that we are very, very specific in our answers. Poetry sections were 20 marks. The exam's at a 60, so we're looking at about half an hour on the poetry section. Your comparative essay, okay, focus on Death of a Salesman or Mice and Men. Please review how to write a comparative essay. Look at the feedback you've been given on the comparative essay that you handed in. And make sure that we correct any mistakes. I've kind of isolated some themes. These themes are no mystery. We've talked about them quite a bit. And these themes relate both to Of Mice and Men and Death of a Salesman. So you can assume that on the exam, the options for answering these theme questions are going to be these. So loneliness, concept of loneliness and isolation, the American dream, how it relates to the tragic hero, and how Willy Loman or George or Lenny can be considered to be tragic heroes, and the role of women in the works. So you know that your thesis will be, your essay will be on these types of questions. So my suggestion is do an outline for each one of these. So if you could say, if I ask on loneliness and isolation, my thesis would be this. Here are the 2 main points I would use, and here are the examples I would use, and so on and so on. The format of the essay, we're looking for introduction, 1 main point. We know that it's 1 main point. You're going to ask for 2 arguments in the main point, but you know that in a comparative essay, 1 example really is talking about both things. So my first main point, my first argument is going to have, my first example is going to be an example from Death of a Salesman and an example from Of Mice and Men. Then we state clearly how they compare. Then I'm going to move on to another example, which is another example from Of Mice and Men and another example from Death of a Salesman. And again, I then directly compare them. So you're going to have 4 examples total, 2 from each piece, and 2 direct comparisons. Right here, I've given you a practice essay. You can open up this document. It'll give you a very good example of, very good example of a comparative essay. Okay, going back to our lesson. If you click here, I've given you the exact, this is an exact copy of the exam. What I haven't given you is the question. So here's exactly what your exam is going to be like. If you click on this, it'll take you here. Here's the cover page. We know that the exam is out of 60. It's worth 20% of your final mark. Instructions here. Okay, so here will be the actual poem. Okay, there's going to be a title and by the author, not just some old guy. You're going to either choose to answer the question. We have a question. The first question is on the concept of voice. What is the voice of the poem? What's the message or lesson that the author is trying to say? You have to explain very clearly what the author is trying to teach us using proof and examples. It's out of 5. The next question is persona. You have to create, what is the character in the poem? You have to be as creative as possible and then explain why you feel that the author is using this kind of character, this narrator, to narrate the poem. Again, this isn't in the poem. You're gonna have to make it up, and it can be anything. There's no right or wrong answer here as long as you're using proof from the poem to back up what you're saying. Questions on imagery and symbolism. You need to make sure you definitely define what the image is. What is the physical sensation you're feeling? Or what is the symbol? What is the concrete object that the author is using to convey an abstract concept? And then you explain what the abstract concept is. Then finally, you've got a question on relating the poem to your world. So that's the poetry section. It should be about half an hour. Okay. Then we have the comparative essay. Okay. Just a blurb about comparative essay. The format of the essay. So it is your argument happens here. Then an example from Of Mice and Men. You explain the example. You then find an example from Death of a Salesman. You explain the example. Then you directly compare them. And this is where you're going to get your marks. Okay, is how well you directly compare the 2 examples you've chosen to use. Then you do that process again as a second example of your first main point. And then you use your conclusion. Okay, the questions will be here. Here is the rubric that's going to be used to evaluate your essay. Note that the 2 middle sections are worth the most out of 15. So, do you express your thesis very well? How well do you use evidence? Are your ideas organized? And your use of language are the key pieces here. Okay, so that's it. That's your exam in a nutshell. I've tried to be as detailed as I can without giving everything away. Please prepare as best you can. If you have any questions, let me know.